Cuomo, our governor, gave us an ultimatum.
It's a lot of money to fix it.
Gave us an ultimatum. He's basically saying, like, either, to fund the MTA, which, by the way, the MTA, I guess we should start with what is the MTA for those who don't know. So the Metropolitan Transportation Authority is a public benefit corporation. What's a public benefit corporation? Public benefit corporations and authorities operate like quasi-private corporations with boards of directors appointed by elected officials overseeing both publicly operated and privately operated systems. Public authorities share characteristics with government agencies, but they are exempt from many state and local regulations. Of particular importance, they can issue their own debt, allowing them to bypass limits on state debt contained in the New York State Constitution. This allows public authorities to make potentially risky capital and infrastructure investments like the Fulton Street hub or whatever they created. They created like this massive hub in Manhattan where it just has like a mall in it and stuff. Anyways, infrastructure investments without directly putting the credit of New York State or its municipalities on the line. As a result, public authorities have become widely used for financing public works, and they are now responsible for more than 90% of the state's debt. The growing influence of public authorities over state and local financing, coupled with their ability to avoid regulations applicable to government agencies, has led to calls for reform. Some reforms were passed in the public authorities. All right, so you get the picture. Like, it's not completely private. It's not completely public. I believe they do get some tax money, although Cuomo, I believe, was saying that with this new plan, it'll be, they'll be cut off from tax funding. But, I don't know, we'll see, right? So it's responsible for public transportation in the state of New York, serving 12 counties in downstate New York, along with 2 counties in southwestern Connecticut under contract to the Connecticut Department of Transportation, carrying over 11 million passengers on an average weekday system-wide and over 850,000 vehicles on its 7 toll bridges and 2 tunnels per weekday. MTA is the largest public transit authority in the United States. So it's this massive, massive beast of an entity. I'm just curious here. What is the annual budget of the MTA? Of course, it's not so easy to see, right? Where is it? $2019 budget. Let's see. Let's see. I just want to see a quick graph. I feel like information about the MTA is suppressed. I remember reading an article several years ago that said an MTA board member was caught using transit police as a chauffeur. So he had like a transit officer who was getting paid like $100,000 a year, which is a lot today, but 10 years ago it was way more, right? Or I don't even know if it was 10 years ago, but several years ago, maybe like 5 to 10 years ago. And I can't find the article anymore. I looked all over the internet, like I can't find it. I forgot what website it was. So I couldn't really use the Wayback Machine. Instead of using the public transportation that they help to manage, they don't use that. They use city money to get chauffeured around. I don't know if that's still the case today, but I wouldn't be surprised. Anyways, I don't know. I was trying to find the MTA budget, but could face, whoa. MTA could face $42 billion in outstanding debt by 2022. Wow. Despite the many plans in place to get the MTA back on track, problems continue, blah, blah, blah. 26-page report. I'm thinking about doing a full, investigative report on the MTA. It doesn't seem like there's enough out there that really exposes the MTA. Like when you go looking on YouTube, there really isn't that much. But let's continue on with the topic at hand here, because we could potentially be talking about this one topic the whole show. So let's just get to it.
But who's going to pay up? How much? How are we going to get those people to pay up is all part of the equation on how to truly get this done. Governor Cuomo was pushing very hard for congestion pricing. He has been for a long time. Congestion pricing has been floated for more than a decade now to try to get riders who come into a certain zone in Manhattan, this time they're saying below 60th Street, to pay more, to pay an additional toll just for the privilege of being inside Manhattan. It's either that or strap hangers have to pay an extra 30% on top of what they're paying now, in addition to tolls
30%.
going up and also commuter railroad prices going up. Listen in as the governor lays it out.
Trump is not going to pay. The city's not going to pay. The state doesn't have the money to pay. Either the rider pays in fares and tolls, or it's congestion pricing. That is the real choice. And that's how we have to frame the choice.
This is such bullshit. You only got two choices, and both of the choices put the burden on the average citizen. What about option C, audit the MTA, because they embezzle money, okay? They waste money, all right? They're the real fucking crooks here, all right? I was talking about this on Twitter as well, and some idiot fucking replied. It was like, oh, everybody is lazy. They don't want to pay for anything. And I was like, okay, yeah, some people are like that, but you don't understand. Like you don't live in New York City. You don't understand that the MTA is wasting tons of money. And he tells me, oh, I lived in New York City for 2 years. I was like, yo, that's like a vacation. You don't understand what the hell is going on. You haven't done your research. So it was like one of those brain dead partisans. This one just happened to be a Republican partisan who is unable to see outside of his own ideology. And Democrats and Republicans more and more fall into that trap of only seeing through one lens. And you just assume, you're like, oh, you disagree with me. You must be a Republican. Oh, you disagree with me. You must be a Democrat. That shit's like all the time now. It's so stupid and so ignorant. Like, I lose all respect for people who do that. Who are like, oh, are you a Republican? You must be a Democrat. Or you must be a Republican. How about I'm neither, and I just agree with certain things based on if they make sense or not? Whatever happened to, using common sense and your own individual critical thinking? Why is it that you got to follow what your fucking ideologues tell you, and that's how you fucking run your life, a fucking preset fucking political viewpoint? You're putting yourself in a fucking box. How many people have thought about, hey, maybe in option C, fucking audit the MTA? And we're going to be looking into more details on how they waste money further we go into this show, but I don't want to spend more than an hour on this because I could easily spend the whole show talking about this.
It's A or B because there is no C.
The thumbnail sketch on congestion pricing, it would start around 2021. It could be $11.52. That number might shift depending on if you're in a car or a truck or coming in during rush hour or off-peak times. As you can see,
Well, $11 just to get into the city?
it's not really very defined right now, and that's why legislators are having a hard time with this. They can't even talk to constituents about it because they don't have definitive numbers to lay on the table.
Well, you might.
So, nothing has really been set in stone yet, but they're still talking about it, it would seem. Let's see. So, fare evaders to blame for budget crisis. Let's go.
Not you, Craig, but anyone out there who's watching this morning might be at fault here, at least in part, because the MTA says a lot of riders are not paying their fair share of. In fact, about 500,000 people who ride the subways or on the buses are just not paying to ride. People are jumping turnstiles, and that, in fact, is leading to this budget shortfall. And the agency says it's costing all of us in the long run. So let's take a look at the numbers. The MTA did a study at about 300 stations and bus routes, mostly in Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx, and it suffered well over $200 million in lost revenue in 2018, with nearly 350,000 people catching a bus without paying and over 200,000 jumping turnstiles every single day. That's out of about 6 million daily riders. Those numbers just released when announcing a new round of budget cuts for the embattled agency. It's up against a $1 billion budget deficit by the year 2021. So right now they're beginning to trim whichever fat they can find. Here's the bad news. It means that the MTA will adjust its crowding guidelines to save $40 million, meaning even tighter, dirtier, less temperate subway trains and buses, all to save money.
The level of fare evasion has gone up, but that is a factor. And what's striking is the correlation between that decision being made, the corresponding decline in...
Why am I supposed to listen to this clearly a foreigner? I mean, I hate to be a dick, but... What's good, mate? Why should I listen to you, mate? I've lived in the city all my life. When did you get here, mate?
Arrests and in other enforcement activity, and an increase in fare evasion. So I think it is a fairly major factor.
And Byford said the most turnstile jumping offenders are right here in Manhattan, partly to blame, he says, because the DA last February decided to stop charging people and criminally prosecuting anyone who went inside for free, though the DA's office firing back, saying that the criminal justice system is not a collection agency. Reporting live in Times Square, I'm Anthony DiLorenzo, Pixel.
They say that, but it is. I mean, largely the criminal justice system is basically another way to collect taxes by giving you tickets for things like, oh, you didn't pick up your dog's poop. Here's a $200 ticket. Oh, you're not wearing your seatbelt. Here's a ticket. 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 It's just another way to tax people.
Working on the railroad apparently pays. A new report reveals 1 in 4 workers at the MTA makes a 6-figure salary, and on the Long Island Railroad,
one out of 4? 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. Hold on, can we bring that back? Hold on a second. Hold on a second, guys.
Railroad apparently pays. A new report reveals 1 in 4 workers at the MTA makes a 6-figure salary.
1 in 4 workers of the MTA makes a 6-figure salary, $100,000 or more. Really? With the service they provide? Oh my God! Listen. If you visit New York, it's hard to really understand the level of incompetence with the MTA. It's really hard to understand this. So I don't expect anyone who doesn't live in New York City to not understand it. You know, I don't expect you to understand this. I don't expect you to understand this. I've lived in this city most of my life. Other than like the 2.5 years I lived in San Antonio, Texas, I lived here in New York City. So that's over 30 years living in this city, dealing with the MTA.
And on the Long Island Railroad, the percentage is even higher. CBS 2's Carolyn Gussoff reports.
They're on the move. Long Island Railroad workers' salaries going up 27% last year. The average railroad worker pulled in $106,000, and 130 employees earned more than $200,000, while riders struggle with rising fares.
Way too excessive for the type of work that they're doing.
I mean, I wish I could make 3 figures, and I'm an attorney.
That's a lot. That's ridiculous.
Raking in salaries in the mid $200,000 range, track foremen, repair.
Well, I mean, if you're an attorney not making 6 figures, you're doing something wrong.
Airmen, signal inspectors, yard masters. Is it right?
Oh my gosh. No.
The MTA calls the report by the Empire Center for Public Policy flawed because salaries reflect last year's union settlements, one-time only payments for work they had done years earlier. But take away that average retroactive pay, you still have $250,000 a year railroad workers.
The highest paid MTA employees, in fact, are mainly not the brass. Most of the people among the highest paid MTA employees are blue-collar workers.
What about top brass with top salaries in the mid $300,000 and $400,000 range?
You see how they just fucking lie to your face? It's so easy to lie. It's so easy to lie nowadays because the masses have goldfish memory. People don't remember things. Because as soon as one scandal hits, the distraction hits the next day. When BuzzFeed put out the fake story recently, saying, oh, this anonymous source, we got this anonymous source talking about the Russian collusion, Trump's going to get impeached. And then Robert Mueller comes out and debunks it, says, hey, that's a fake story. And then all of a sudden, boom, the Covington, Nathan Phillips thing becomes huge. And then that turns out to be not 100% true the way fucking the media portrayed it. So the lesson is, don't believe what the media says. Fucking at face value. You got to research that shit and make sure it's true, especially if they take like a 1-minute clip out of context. You know something's up.
Who makes that kind of money?
Corporate America of large organizations really get that kind of money.
Among the highest paid union workers, MTA police.
We're charged with protecting major transportation facilities, and we have to be there. There's no other way to do it aside from hiring police officers on a straight-time basis.
66 workers earned more than $100,000 in overtime due to work rule restrictions. Is the public getting ripped off?
We give the public the data and say you decide.
The report
And a big part of that is the unions, the police unions, the construction unions. It's great for them. They get benefits and things like that, but you're screwing the average person, who don't get those type of representation and those kind of benefits. Like, what the hell? Freaking $130-something for a cop, dude, just to fucking stand around a station? That's kind of ridiculous, don't you think? I think it's pretty ridiculous.
Ended as a wake-up call to those folks writing the checks, the riders and taxpayers. In Mineola, Carolyn Gussoff, CBS 2 News.
And top salaries also went to Metro North workers. One machinist earned more than $300,000, including overtime.
Hi, I'm Doug with another Reclaimer update. Commuters have witnessed politicians and MTA officials running New York's mass transit system off the tracks, sometimes literally. Anyone with half a brain should be hesitant to give them more money after years of mismanagement have spiraled into the summer of hell. But that's exactly what the governor, MTA chair...
Oh my God, this just reminded me of what happened 1 or 2 summers ago, where this train... let me see. MTA train stuck. I couldn't breathe. Look at this. this? Was it this? Yeah, it was this one.
This was a life and death matter. This needs to be taken extremely seriously.
Michael Sharaffa was one of hundreds of frustrated, angry, sweaty subriders trapped on the stalled F train last night without power, in the dark, no air conditioning or ventilation.
You do not see the sweat on our face.
Sharaffa says the train stopped in the tunnel after a power problem, trapping passengers for 45 minutes, and that it got so hot.
People started to sweating. People were taking their clothes off.
He says some felt faint, the doors to the train clouded with condensation and defiant messages. One passenger writing, "I will survive." Sharaffa says the worst part was not receiving information from train personnel about what was happening and when it would be over. Ultimately, the train had to be pushed to the next station for passengers to exit, frantically prying at the doors to get out.
Oh my God.
According to the Riders Alliance, a watchdog group, delays have nearly tripled in the past 4 years.
It's just getting worse.
And some are pointing fingers about all this on the man in charge of the MTA.
Like we did it on the 2nd Avenue subway.
Governor Cuomo touting that project, but mum on subway delays.
We need to ask Governor Cuomo, where are you and what are you going to finally do about this?
At a labor rally today, the governor would not speak to us about the subway nor grant our interview requests.
We also contacted the MTA requesting an on-camera interview to discuss the F-train trouble and what many say is an overall decline in service.
The agency emailed it is looking into why customers didn't get better communication from the train crew.
It was like 150 degrees in there.
A train ride they won't soon forget. Scott Rappaport, CBS 2 News.
That's insane. That's insane. I would have been kicking out the windows. Nah, man, you're not gonna catch me fucking dying of suffocation and heat exhaustion in a fucking train, bro. I'm gonna kick out the windows. I'm gonna break that shit open. Nah, man. No. No. I don't give a fuck. That'll be the first, after like 20 minutes, I'm like, all right, man, let's break the windows. All right, you over there, fucking like, all right, everybody got like a bat, and who got something strong to fucking knock this? All right, we're just gonna kick it open. All right, let's kick it. Like 1, 2, 3, bang, 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 yeah. Fuck that shit, man. Fuck the MTA, man.
And now Mayor de Blasio want to do. Here's what you need to know. For starters, a recent report found that the MTA promoted individuals based on friendship, encouraged time wasting, and had an overall lack of desire to improve itself. Even the state comptroller has criticized the MTA.
Whenever your paycheck is guaranteed, there's no incentive to work. There's no incentive to work, which is why communism fails, why socialism fails. You fucking guarantee people money and they don't want to work. They don't want to work as hard. You got to have competition. Before the MTA, the New York Subway System was separated into different lines, different companies ran it. Okay? That's how it should be. It shouldn't be all run by the same monolith, what am I trying to say? Monolith organization. They should be competing with one another. Okay, so I think they need to break up the MTA, completely privatize it, and but it's tough to do that now because like they said like $1 billion in debt by 2021. The fuck.
For doing a poor job managing its cash on hand. The mismanagement is not old news. The MTA just hired a former Department of Education employee who oversaw at least $6.5 million in lost money through fraudulent contracts. The MTA has lost sight of prioritizing smart service decisions. They've diverted funds away from signal and track repairs. Instead, the agency has continued to funnel money to flashy projects like expanding the 2nd Avenue subway, and even during the summer of hell, they have cut spending on fixes and maintenance. This is like a ship trying to sail without a navigation system. It would not matter how much fuel you threw into the engine, it would waste it, and there would be no guarantee it would ever get to its destination. New Yorkers should demand a top-to-bottom review and reform of the MTA's management and financial practices. It's time for the MTA to stop asking for more money from taxpayers and instead prove they can manage what they have responsibly. Thanks for watching, sharing, and staying informed, because it's up to all of us to reclaim New York.
And this is endemic with just with any kind of government. You know what I'm saying? You give them money, they you know, you're forced to give them money. Their paycheck is guaranteed. Of course, they're going to mismanage funding.
And good evening to you. I'm Liz Chow.
And I'm Bill Ritter. It is a disturbing juxtaposition. The MTA threatening huge service cuts and double-digit fare hikes, while some of their workers are discovered by the Eyewitness News investigators wasting time.
This is an old video. This is from 2009, but I mean, you know, the MTA has been fucking up for a long time and consistently raises the fares.
Time and taxpayer money. Jim Hoffer here with the results of his 3-month investigation. Jim?
Bill and Liz, you know the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, it's video. And as you watch it, keep in mind, those who run the railroad want to raise your fares because they claim they're broke. He's supposed to be working. Instead, this transit track inspector is headed home after a little grocery shopping. These transit employees should be working too. Instead, they're using the MTA dump truck to drive 30 miles to a beach on Long Island to hang out, chat, and catch an ocean breeze. Other transit workers have so much free time during their 8-hour shift, they set up an outdoor gym where they can exercise at all hours of the workday. How many hours do you, on average, actually work on the track in an 8-hour shift?
Typically, it's about 1 hour or 1 hour and a half. Actual work.
Fed up with what he calls a culture of waste and abuse at a time when the MTA threatens record fare hikes, this track worker, who asked us to conceal his identity, says the problem...
Wow, they were talking about $3 a ride back in 2009? It's $2.75 right now.
...starts high up. Where are the bosses? Where are the supervisors?
The supervisors are there. The problem is that supervisors allow this type of behavior.
That's why we've chosen not to identify individual workers. Instead, look at this pattern. This track worker signs in just before 8 a.m. A minute later, leaves, ending up at this restaurant, where he spends the next hour having a leisurely breakfast. Then it's over to a nearby park, where he reads for nearly...
And if the supervisors don't give a shit, how do you expect the workers to give a shit? If I fucking go to a job I'm not even crazy about, and my supervisor, doesn't give a shit, I'm not gonna give a shit. I'll probably end up doing the same shit. Like, why would I even be here if I'm like, I'm not gonna be the only one who cares. The hell, I'm still getting a paycheck. Because at the end of the day, you're thinking about yourself and your own freedom and your own free time. Like, a lot of people, like working jobs they don't like. So if you don't like your job, you don't feel particularly beholden to be doing it. Which is why I like nonprofit education, because I actually like working with kids. I like doing that shit. It wouldn't be hard to set up something where, I'm not being hassled by, supervisors and things like that, where I'm given the freedom and independence and power to do my job. Then I would love to go to work and things like that. But if you have a fucking job like that in MTA, me personally, I wouldn't like. So I don't necessarily blame these workers. I mean, they're doing what they get. They're if they can get away with it, they're gonna get away with it. It's the supervisors that need to fucking crack down on that shit, and ultimately the head of the MTA, the leaders of the MTA, that need to crack down on that.
90 minutes. First the newspaper, then on to a book. He arrives back to work around 10:30. Sometime between 11:30 and noon, he and the rest of the track crew finally begin their work assignment, which takes about 90 minutes to inspect the track. Then he's off again, this time to another park, where he spends the rest of the afternoon reading his novel. Not bad at $25 to $30 an hour, plus full benefits.
They're not to blame. The people to blame are management. Management supervisors are supposed to keep control over this.
Take a look at this track worker. He uses his free time to run a business on the side. Several times we watched as he slipped out of work to head to his bar about 5 miles away. Here he's entering the bar an hour after his workday begins. He stays for about 30 minutes before heading back to his real job at the Subway. By early afternoon, he's back at his bar. On another day, he spends just...
I mean, what can you say? He's fucking smart. He's got his side hustle. He's still getting paid at his current job. How can you blame him? How can you fucking blame him? I don't blame him. I blame the fucking leadership of the MTA, man. How do you expect any business to run properly if the management don't give a shit? If the leadership don't give a shit? How would you expect your average employee to give a shit?
15 minutes inspecting the tracks before heading off to run his bar. That same afternoon, he runs some errands, picking up cases of liquor to stock up on his inventory. On yet another day, he's at the bar by early afternoon, talking for a couple of hours before he heads back to work to clock out at the end of his shift.
Technically, you work in a full-time job and you're doing part-time work.
For 3 days, we tried to get New York City Transit to respond to our investigation. They declined and instead released a statement calling our findings disturbing. The agency says it did alert the Inspector General, and if our allegations prove true, they say they'll take disciplinary action, including possibly dismissal of workers and even criminal prosecution. He's back at his bar. The head of the Transport Workers Union says there's a reason why we found so many workers killing time. It's because, he says, they're not allowed on the tracks during rush hours, and their bosses want them to lay low.
Transit workers are discouraged from assembling on the station platforms or in the entrances to stations out of concern that the public can easily misunderstand that and believe that they're lollygaggling and they're just idling or lounging.
Hanging out in parks, lounging at the bar, passing time lifting weights, while those running the railroad threaten fare hikes. Can't we do with fewer track workers?
I don't think so. And I think
and just give them more than 2 hours of work in an 8-hour day.
I actually think it is very untypical what you describe.
Untypical. Tomorrow in Eyewitness News at 6, Part 2 of our investigation reveals just how typical the 2-hour workday is among track crews that we monitor. Now, if you have an issue you need investigated, please give our tip line a call at 877-TIP-NEWS. You can also email us at the.investigators@abc.com. The big question here, how widespread is this abuse and waste?
Six-figure salary. Get paid a 6-figure salary for working 2 hours a day? Man, that sounds like a great job.
Spoken to, say it, run.
Well, tonight, David Goldstein investigates lavish spending by the MTA.
Hundreds of thousands of your tax dollars going to things other than transportation. He joins us now with what he found.
Yeah, we found almost $250,000. Now, remember when MTA was pushing for Measure M and the previous Measure R, with that money going toward transportation upgrades? Well, we found some other places the money is going, hundreds of thousands of dollars in food and a talent show that very few people saw.
The first ever talent showcase.
These are MTA employees.
You got to know when to hold it.
Performing at a talent show for an audience of co-workers and anyone else who showed up. Even though it was done after hours, we discovered you're paying for it. We obtained receipts showing the MTA shelled out more than $20,000 last year to stage this event for employees in downtown LA, all paid for with public money. Why? That's what we asked MTA Chief Communications Officer Pauletta Tonilis. How does the talent show benefit the bus riders, the train riders?
This was about employee appreciation.
And that's just one small part. CBS 2 News has obtained hundreds of receipts showing the MTA spends hundreds of thousands of dollars of your money to make sure its employees are appreciated and well fed. Like $3,000 for burgers and $3,000 for hot dogs to cater a Meet Your Diversity and Economic Opportunity department, $1,600 for a sandwich buffet for a business meeting, $1,800 for the eye-opener breakfast for 140 people. Add it all up, we found more than $228,000 spent on in-house food for MTA employees. The business meeting, $1,600 for a sandwich buffet for a business meeting, $1,800 for the
$1,800 for
eye-opener.
$1,800 for breakfast for 140 people? How much is that per person? Let me see. What's 1,800 divided by 140? It's like 12. That's like almost $13 per person. $13 a person. The hell? That's definitely a waste.
Breakfast for 140 people. Add it all up, we found more than $228,000 spent on in-house food for MTA employees. That's just from January through August of last year. 8 months, almost $250,000. It works out to an average of just over $940 a day.
All this money on catering.
Right.
Is that right in your mind?
Eric Mann is with the Bus Riders Union, a group that advocates reduced fares and better conditions on the buses and rails.
The painful part is not that specific amount of money. It's what's inside the mind of a person that would say nothing but the best for me, but the poor, let them pay or let them not ride. That's the cruelty of it.
MTA says some of the food is for catered meetings that go on for hours, and some, they claim, is paid for with profits from vending machines, although they never provided any proof. They do admit a majority of the receipts we found were paid for with public money, like the money generated by measures M and R. When M was overwhelmingly approved in 2016, the agency said it would fund a litany of things like improve freeway traffic flow, repair potholes. Nothing here about meals for employees.
Do you think this is what people thought they were voting for?
I think that the people of Los Angeles County understand that employee appreciation is a part of any good company's practices.
Do you really think so?
I do believe that.
And it's not just food. We found the MTA paid more than $15,000 last year to rent out the Orpheum Theater in downtown LA for their awards breakfast, which of course was catered.
Thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to be here.
And MTA board members who are elected officials are also eating well. We uncovered receipts for 55 orders of prime rib and salmon with all the fixings. That cost more than $1,500.
Prime rib? What?
Make changes?
After we asked the tough questions, MTA says they may make some changes.
Is the fact that you have done your due diligence and brought this to our attention, I think, is a good opportunity for us to take a look at what we're doing and see if we need to make some changes.
You got to know when to hold up.
But certainly no promises from the MTA that they'll stop the spending, only a promise that they'll look into it. Back to you guys.
You see, and then when you go back to Cuomo saying, oh, it's either A or B, congestion pricing or raising the fare. I mean, what the fuck, dude?
Now, myth number 2. We need government to invest in infrastructure. That does make sense.
We do need ways of getting places faster. And building infrastructure does create jobs.
Let's get moving.
These days, politicians want to spend more on trains.
The 220-mile-an-hour train that would take us from L.A. to San Fran in 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Cool, except this is only a promise. The train line the politicians approved starts and ends in the boondocks, where economist Adrian Moore lives.
I live in a little mountain town called Tehachapi. It's in the middle of nowhere, 50 miles to the nearest Walmart. And the high-speed rail line in California comes right through my town. This thing is like the boondoggle of boondoggles.
Nobody's living where you're building.
Mass transit advocate Dennis Litton helped get the train project funded.
Although to play devil's advocate on that, usually business grows where transportation shows up, you know. So in areas where you build transportation to, businesses start showing up there. I mean, going back to the beginning of civilization, I mean, civilizations was set up by the rivers and stuff because you could transport goods along the river, you know, put businesses by the coast because you can have docks there and things like that. So that argument is a little bit weak. You know, it's fine. There's nothing there. I mean, things could be built there if there's transportation there. But let's continue with this video.
Lots of people live in California. They're starting high-speed rail in the middle of the state because that's where you can build it fast. We envision high-speed rail connecting the big endpoints, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego.
That will cost another $100 billion.
You're expecting private investors.
Private investors will be a part of the mix.
Have any come forward?
Not at this time, but there's every reason to believe that they will.
The private money was always a joke because private money will invest in something where they can make a profit. There's no way this project is ever going to pay for itself.
So why does it happen?
Oh, because it's visionary, John. It's very, very visionary.
Trains will revolutionize our global transportation infrastructure.
Trains are romantic. Litton likes California's Amtrak trains.
Amtrak trains, they're packed.
They're packed?
Yes.
The cafe car will be closing.
Actually, here's what it looked like recently when we taped. On average, Amtrak's California trains fill just a third of their seats. But if we don't invest in trains, what's the mass transit alternative? New buses. This is now the fastest growing mass transit in America. Why?
Because it's cheaper.
Buses don't get the big subsidies, but they're still much cheaper than trains.
$3.50 just to get to Delaware? Yeah, so I'll take that.
Amtrak is too expensive. I don't have $200 to spend.
More typically, an Amtrak ticket from New York to D.C. costs about $150, and a bus ticket just $20.
It's cheap. That's basically it.
Also, today's buses are pleasant. They have extras like Wi-Fi. And most important, a bus can go where the people go. Trains run in straight lines, but people move every which way. Only cars and buses can change routes to follow them.
They're making money and doing a better job?
Yes, and growing because they're more flexible.
Which raises the question, why should taxpayers lose more money on trains? People cite New York subways as a reason that government must provide infrastructure. Yes, these lose money, but it's worth it. They transport lots of us.
What would have happened in New York if we'd waited for private investors to build the subway?
Would have never happened. Private investors can't do it because it's a public good that they can't profit from.
Makes sense, and if you ask people who built the subways,
I think it was the government.
Either President Eisenhower or maybe like a mayor.
By union workers.
But actually,
built in 1878, before the Brooklyn Bridge, before the Statue of Liberty.
The original subways in New York were all private.
It carried tens of millions of passengers.
Then, after 50 years, the private companies tried to raise the fare to a dime.
People didn't like the idea of paying a higher fare, and the mayor took advantage of that and said, well, fine, the government will take it over and we won't raise the fare.
But of course, government did. And now the fare is $2.50.
We're going to see in a video coming up that because they didn't raise the fare, they started losing money and getting into this huge deficit.
And now that government builds subways, construction takes longer. This subway was supposed to be done in 1938. Then they said 1980. Now they say 2018. It's taken so long that the subway cars built for it, which cost $1 million each, now won't be used because they no longer fit the tracks. And we no longer need the ultraviolet lights they have to kill polio germs. So private companies did it faster 150 years ago, without this modern equipment. Why? Because they had competition and their own money on the line.
I want to recognize up front a number of officials, elected officials.
Politicians have different incentives, like sucking up to other politicians.
Councilmember Jessica Lappin, Councilmember Daniel Garodnick.
And government workers have time to stand around. Yet despite the delays, despite the billions lost, government wants more trains.
It's rail, 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 and rail.
Hello, I'm Sean Patrick Maloney, and welcome to the Maloney Minute. We're here at 2 Broadway. Now, this is a great example because it involves the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the MTA, the poster child for everything wrong with the New York public authorities. 2 Broadway was supposed to be the MTA's new headquarters. It was supposed to cost $100 million. Bad enough. But that was before corruption and mismanagement and the Gambino crime family got involved. This $100 million project ended up costing you and me $400 million. And the MTA doesn't have $400 million, so they borrowed the money to do this project. And by the time we're done paying it off, it'll be an $800 million project. $100 million to $800 million. Think about that the next time you swipe your fare card. But you know what? Even if you don't live in New York City, if you live upstate, you're still paying for this with your hard-earned tax dollars. And we'll never get to the bottom of these things unless the Attorney General's office does to Albany what Eliot Spitzer did to Wall Street. If you give me a chance, that's just what I'm going to do. Oh, and you know what? The punchline on this building, after $800 million, the MTA isn't going to use it. They want to do the same thing up on the west side and never use this facility. This is the problem with New York's public authorities.
Senator Patrick Maloney. What else we got?
Cell phone video taken inside.
Oh, this is just a good example. Oh, shit. Man, I hate when this shit happens.
At the East Broad.
Okay, it's just my... Gosh. You gotta love Streamlabs OBS. Hold on a second. Oh, God. Erg. Gotta love it when my video capture glitches out every damn time. Here we go. Ain't that special? Isn't that just precious? Isn't that just precious? Isn't that just convenient? How I have to now adjust everything once again. It doesn't fail. Always happens. Fucking always happens too. Always happens. Gotta love it. Gotta love technology. Always fails. Never fails to fail. All right. So this just shows you some more of the excellent service that the MTA provides here with the MTA police. This guy attacking these homeless guys.
Broadway subway station shows police officer Syed Ali fighting off 4 homeless men with a baton who authorities say were intoxicated. Investigators say Ali stepped in to help a woman who was being harassed by the men on the platform Sunday night. As the men continue to come at Ali, one falls onto the subway tracks.
It's alarming to think about being the woman and also being the person who was drunk and attacked the officer and went on the train tracks.
The officer immediately called for the trains to be stopped and the man was not injured. All 4 were arrested and taken in for psychological evaluation. Ali, an Army veteran.
That just speaks to like the homeless epidemic in this city. You know, people can't afford, they can't afford to live, man. Like, when you've got rent that's, $1,500 and up, and, you're making less than $60,000, you can't really, it's hard to really afford living out here.
And was praised by police and city officials for de-escalating the situation. But some are now slamming the Manhattan District Attorney's Office for not charging the men with attacking an officer.
These people need to be charged. A message needs to be sent that if you attack an officer for doing his or her job, we need to send a strong message. We have a crisis in the city. We have homeless people who are sleeping throughout our transit systems and on our streets.
We reached out to the DA's office, who says the men were not arrested for attacking the officer, but instead for a non-criminal violation, which the DA's office declined to prosecute. But the head of the police office,
afraid of getting countersued, is what?
Officers Union Pat Lynch called the move another example of the DA's attempt to, quote, decriminalize criminal behavior in the subways. Former Police Commissioner Bill Bratton also warned on Twitter that the failure to enforce quality of life offenses, especially in the subways, would bring back the high crime level of the 1970s and 80s. The incident is the latest in a string of subway assaults, and while police say crime is down overall citywide, transit crime is up 2.5% compared to this time last year.
You know what would help? If you allowed people to arm themselves. Okay, maybe not necessarily guns, but you can't even carry a knife that's longer than like 2 inches long. So if you got people running around, strapped with their own knife and shit like that, people would be less likely to fuck with you, right? Because the criminals are gonna carry the knives anyway. They're gonna break the law. I mean, I seen a couple years ago some kid like 16 years old or maybe younger, like openly carrying brass knuckles, which are illegal. Let me carry my brass knuckles, huh? So if I see somebody getting robbed, I could just run up behind them, pop right in the fucking head. Or if somebody tries to rob me, I'll fucking have something to protect myself with. I think at least you should carry pepper spray in this city, especially if you're a woman. Pepper spray is one of the few things that's actually legal to carry to protect yourself. Tasers are illegal, so you can't even carry a taser to protect yourself. At least allow tasers, non-lethal thing. If it's legal to carry a taser, maybe people would hesitate to do things like that, to attack people, assault people. You gotta let people defend themselves.
Mayor de Blasio,
because the criminals will have the fucking weapons regardless. By definition, criminals do not follow the law. Duh.
Also chimed in online 2 days after the attack, saying acts like this will not be tolerated, and announced increased patrols around subway stations to ensure rider safety. In the Lower East Side, Natalie Duddridge, CBS 2 News.
The city is awake. Across the length of its 5 boroughs, the vast stream of humanity will move.
This was what a New Yorker's commute looked like in 1961.
Can be seen the daily miracle that is the New York City transit system.
That was then.
Convenient.
And this is now.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Subway riders demanding an end to their commuting nightmare.
Still fed up with all the delays and cancellations that they are suing the MTA.
New York Subway now has the worst on-time performance of any major rapid transit system in the world, and commuters are pissed. This woman's commute has gotten so bad she's considering leaving a job she really likes.
No, I got a new job.
This rabbi was sent into a panic when his train stalled just before Shabbat. And then there's this guy who was...
This is why I'm hesitant. This is part of the reason why I'm hesitant to get another job that is over an hour commute away, because I know the MTA is fucking unreliable. I would rather, it's like I need a job that's like one train, like I could just take one train and not have to transfer. That's the kind of setup I'm looking for right now.
Stuck underground for so long, commuters saying to pass the time.
God gonna make me lose my mind up in here.
It's been 2 hours.
They ended up making a Facebook group. They're still in touch.
Yeah.
The mornings where every single line is delayed
Feels like cruel or arbitrary.
But it really wasn't that long ago that New Yorkers would laugh at other city subway systems. 4 lines in Boston, 2 in LA, that's cute. In New York, our trains run 24/7. We have 665 miles of track, 472 stations, 27 subway lines, and almost 6 million riders every single day.
Does it really have to be this way?
Also, has it always been this bad?
Turns out, the MTA has recovered from a transit crisis before.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are being helped momentarily by the train's dispatcher.
These were the trains in the 1970s.
poor maintenance, high crime, and widespread graffiti.
It was kind of scary.
And that's Jim. He's been reporting on the subway since before I was born.
He wrote the book about the subway, literally. In the 70s, it was really, really bad.
Maintenance really had suffered.
So officials poured money into the system, and it improved.
They are working on it. They're doing the best they can.
They're fixing the track.
Well, they're
fixing the track. They put in a new escalator downstairs.
Improved it in the 80s.
Today we got better equipment, better parts, and better tools.
In the 90s, it gets to be kind of the best it's ever been.
The 1990s were the golden era of subway functionality.
So if you want to prove to someone that New York has it all, just show them your MetroCard Gold.
New York's governor at the time, George Pataki, called it a transit renaissance. But then that city that has it all started taking the system for granted. Starting with Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
Cut down the size of city government.
Just a year into his first term, the mayor cut the city's contribution to the MTA's budget by millions of dollars. And then Governor Pataki followed Giuliani's lead. And so began a trend of mayors and governors diverting part of their budgets away from the MTA and toward their own priorities, and then blaming one another for the problems that followed.
Right.
So while the city and state contributions got smaller and smaller and smaller, subway ridership went up, and so did the fares. But fares still weren't enough to make up for the budget cuts. So a group of Wall Street executives came to the MTA with a deal. These Wall Street execs, they went to the head of the MTA, also known as the governor, and said, "Give us your debt. We'll pay you cash. Pay us back later." Pataki agreed to the deal to refinance the MTA's debt.
Basically, they used the Amex to pay off the MasterCard.
And these bankers, many of whom were donors to Governor Pataki's campaign, walked away with $85 million in commissions and fees. And that debt lives on today.
Finally reaches its destination.
Even if some of the equipment we're still paying for does not.
Great habitat enhancement for fish and shellfish.
Then
there was a fiscal crisis globally.
That was a really big turning point for the MTA.
Maintenance was withdrawn.
If you're checking the cars less frequently, you're repairing the cars less frequently, then they're going to break down more frequently.
So basically,
the trains became slightly less reliable.
But there were millions of dollars draining from the MTA's budget that could have been used for maintenance.
So what happened was,
this summer, Governor Cuomo's administration forced the MTA to bail out some upstate ski resorts after an unusually warm winter.
So we set out to try and find out if there were a lot of other examples of the MTA being forced by the state to spend money on things that had nothing to do with the subway. And we found out about these bond issuance fees.
Bond issuance fees may sound a little boring. So I hired a busker to write a song about it.
Well, the MTA is underfunded and operating at a loss. And over half their capital budget is money they borrow by issuing bonds. And every time they issue a bond, they get charged a fee by the state. And it's state funding cuts that force them to issue the bonds in the first place. And in the last 15 years, the MTA has paid the state over $328 million in bond issuance fees. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Let me put it this way. The MTA brings in a lot of money. The state has used that money as a piggy bank for other priorities.
The next stop is Fulton Street.
Fulton Street was the pet project of a guy named Sheldon Silver.
He wanted Fulton Street to be the grand central station of downtown Manhattan. So construction started, the years went by, and the day of the grand opening arrived.
Oh, gosh, we're way over budget.
At this point, the MTA board wants to scale things back. And one of the board members,
Nancy Cheval, wife of Paul McCartney, said, "We're not building cathedrals here."
But the next day, Sheldon Silver demanded,
"You are going to build this thing the way it was originally supposed to be built, or else I'm going to veto your capital budget."
So the MTA complied.
$1.5 billion on one station. We didn't get an extra subway car, an extra foot of track. Nothing.
And that station, if you go to it, I mean, it's just like this, just lavish mall. Like, you know, there's all kind of stores in there. It's basically just made for rich people and tourists to go in there, and they just wasted so much money on that. It's ridiculous.
Did I say it was in his district?
Fulton Street was just one example.
These politicians really wanted to be able to have a big project. They could champion mosaics and artwork, and everything is brand new.
Shiny subway station. This is exciting, right?
I did this for you. Here is my gift to you.
Yeah, and I feel good about that. Of course you should.
You can't really do that with replacing some ancient subway signal system that people don't even know exists.
No one wants to talk about the signal.
Yeah, the signal system is the same one, like an analog system that they've been using since like the early 1900s.
I don't think I understand how the signals even work.
And neither did I. So I watched a documentary released by the MTA to learn more.
People know that the system is old, but I don't think they realize just how old it is. It's not just the architecture that's 100 years old. It's a lot of the basic technology as well. We never really know where the train is.
Yeah, the workers don't actually know where the trains are exactly, precisely on the tracks. They know what section they are in. So they have to keep them a safe distance apart as they go through the system. You can't just go to Best Buy and pick up something to replace this 1930s piece of equipment.
New signals would mean more trains running more efficiently and closer together. But it's been 2 decades since the MTA first began its push to upgrade its signals. And so far, they've completed just one line.
If you don't focus on the core needs of the system, bad things can happen.
The LNC shut down, by the way. The LNC's getting shut down for repairs in the tunnel. That's the only one they freaking fixed the signals. They updated the signals on the one line. They're gonna fucking, oh my god, that's gonna be like, people aren't gonna be using that shit anymore.
Trains were not as well taken care of, the signal system deteriorated, and there was very little margin for error.
And then that margin gets even smaller with Hurricane Sandy.
The worst disaster in the history of the subway system.
So this is the part of the story where all of those bad decisions of the past really start wreaking havoc.
The MTA is openly violating its own safety directive.
The tunnel wall in Brooklyn collapses onto the tracks.
We just boarded the rescue train.
There have been 22 derailments.
Overcrowding is definitely a problem, but the MTA can't blame everything on overcrowding.
The issue is there's not one person to blame.
There's been a lot of back and forth between the governor and the mayor.
Blame everybody who has been in power in New York in the past 25 years.
A train careens off the tracks in Harlem, injuring 34 people. And in summer of 2017, the waiting and crowding and derailments reach a breaking point. And at long last, Governor Cuomo declares a state of emergency.
I mean, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. No pun intended. I actually did not intend that pun. You know, there are some signs that politicians are now taking the maintenance of the subway system seriously.
Elected leaders are finally expected to come out with a plan to pay for the MTA. And I think there's a consensus they can't just rely on debt anymore.
I believe in you, Subway. You gotta get it together.
We want to do this. We need to do this. We will do this.
I think delays in a messed up way are a way to bring people together.
There's no New York City without the subways. I regard it as the great public commons of New York.
Yeah, it was good. Nice meeting all of you.
They ride together, and in this journey can be seen the daily miracle that is the New York City transit system, upon which the very existence of the city and its people depend.
There are extensive delays and suspensions in train service.
So that last video kind of seemed to point the finger at the government for not funding it enough. But as we talked about earlier in today's show, they should have just kept all the train lines private. Competition increases innovation. when you have only your own money to worry about, your own income to worry about, you don't have a fixed income, you have more of an incentive to do a good job, to keep getting paid. You can't expect people to want to pay for something that is shit, especially when they're being forced to do that, essentially. Because what other option do you have in New York City other than the MTA? You just have like Ubers and Lyfts, and they regulate that heavily so that people don't rely on that so much. If they didn't regulate that so much, people would be using Ubers and Lyfts more, and there'd be less strain on the subway system. I mean, just in general, there's just way too many people in New York City as it is. I would love to escape again to a city where, I can actually afford to, have, start my own family, have my own house and things like that. The trouble is, you need money to fucking move places, and, I don't have a car anymore. I only had a car for like a couple years in Texas. And Texas, San Antonio, Texas is a good example. They didn't have trains, of course. They just had a shitty subway system that would, you'd be an hour, you'd have buses running like an hour or two late, and it's like, and it'd be slow as hell. So like, I had to deal with that when I moved to San Antonio, and I found a job and stuff, and had to deal with that for like 6 to 8 months until I could afford to get a car, and then it was smooth sailing, and I would get to work in like 20 minutes versus like an hour plus or whatever.
Because of a temporary loss of power.
The New York City Subway is the circulatory system for the global capital of finance and media. And today, this 114-year-old engineering marvel is coming apart. Stalled trains, signal breakdowns, and constant line closures are complicating the lives of New Yorkers who ride the trains more than 5.5 million times a day. The MTA, the public agency that runs the subways, is woefully mismanaged, fiscally irresponsible, and politically captured. Thanks to the clout of the Transit Workers Union, subway workers on average make $155,000 in total annual compensation, or more than twice as much as the passengers they serve. The political response to this crisis has been mainly to devise new ways to collect more money for this troubled operation, such as a new millionaire's tax or by imposing additional tolls and surcharges on cars. But a major lesson from the first 114 years of subway history is that giving the MTA more money from outside sources is like bringing an alcoholic to an open bar. The path to real reform and accountability is to make the subway live off its customers once and for all.
Subway riders should bear almost the full cost of the ride, with the exception of low-income folks where there's going to be some subsidy.
Baruch Feigenbaum is the Assistant Director of Transportation Policy at the Reason Foundation.
A fare in New York City is a couple bucks and change. What would it be if it was more fully accounted?
So during rush hours, it would probably be at least $5 one way, and probably up to 8 or maybe even 10 based on how far the person is traveling. We charge what it takes to cover the cost, and then for folks who need the service, they would get a voucher or some sort of other discount so they can use it. We're not trying to subsidize upper middle class folks here.
One of the arguments against that is it's going to decrease economic activity overall, because there is a positive externality to subsidizing people to come into Manhattan from the boroughs.
I really don't think $8 or $10 even is that much when you consider some of the other challenges in New York, and people still live there. And the center of everything does not have to be Manhattan.
Is that the limit of transit policy, that people ride and pay the full cost?
That is the most efficient system. It's also the best system for the rider, because if the rider is the one paying the cost, then the transit agency is serving the rider. If Albany is bailing out the transit system, it's going to be whatever Albany wants.
Lately, whatever Albany wants has included budget items big and small that don't have any impact on service and reliability. And this is a theme that extends all the way back to the system's early days. The subway's troubles are deeply rooted in the decline of the fare as its primary revenue source.
Pushing here, pushing there, pushing everywhere. Here's what happens every day in the crowded old subway.
When the subway opened in 1904, it was 5 cents a ride, which was more than enough to finance operations. But when inflation eroded the value of a nickel, the city refused to permit fare increases. By 1920, 500 other U.S. cities had raised fares on their transit systems. Meanwhile, New York City's populist mayor John Hyland campaigned on the preservation of the nickel fare, calling it as sacred and binding as any contracts ever drawn in the history of financial transactions the world over. The fare did eventually go up, but not enough to keep pace with inflation, and the subway's revenue shortages became an endemic problem. Decades later, the city and state discovered a new way to plug up the shortfall, forcing drivers to pay for transit. In 1968, Governor Nelson Rockefeller orchestrated a backroom deal to reallocate revenues from 9 major bridges and tunnels to transit. Last year alone, drivers paid $1.1 billion in tolls that were diverted to subways and buses. The state created more hidden funding streams in the years that followed, and taxes and subsidies now comprise a larger share of the MTA's revenue than fares. These include a special sales, corporate, and payroll tax, and fees on real estate transfers, car rentals, driver's license renewals, and vehicle registrations. And the state just imposed a brand new surcharge on taxis and rideshares coming into Manhattan, with the money going to the MTA. These subsidies violate a central tenet of good transportation policy, which is to make each mode of travel self-sustaining. If fare subsidies were to come to an end, could the subway survive on its customers alone? It could in 1904 when the system opened, and it could in 1982 when the MTA studied the issue and journalist Peter Samuel wrote about it in Reason. The key is getting riders directly invested in slashing wasteful spending and reining in wildly inflated salaries by making them feel the horror, not just of signal malfunctions, train rerouting, and line closures, but that they've paid top dollar for the privilege of such dreadful service.
C trains are not running. We apologize for this inconvenience.
Oh, another multi-billion-dollar project they're working on? Interesting. I wonder how many decades...
Well, the East Side Access Project is it's a complex project, but mainly it's a new 8-track railroad terminal for the Long Island Railroad in the basement of what we know as Grand Central Station. It's going to be able to deliver a 45% increase in Long Island Railroad capacity in the peak hour and give people for the first time the option to go to Grand Central as well as Penn Station.
So $11 billion they're spending on this shit and they still haven't fixed the signal. So, you know what I mean? Are you starting to see this, if you didn't see this already? How the MTA is just wasting money on these pet projects.
The biggest challenges were ones, first of all, we're talking about the scale of the project. It runs over such a huge area from Queens, under the river, into Midtown Manhattan, down Park Avenue. That's, those are huge challenges. I don't blame people for being a little cynical about this. This project's had budget and schedule problems. All I could tell you is we're reaching the point where we have a known volume of work to do. And it's complicated and it's challenging, but we've got the right team.